Joining us now, former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, and Igor Novikov, former advisor to Zelensky. Igor, as we are anticipating this arrival, given you were a senior advisor for Zelensky, what would be your advice today as he's getting ready to talk to Trump?
Well, I would separate emotions from, the practical side of things, because if we look at this potential agreement, it's actually good news for both Ukraine and the United States, as long as it's non-zero sum, as long as it's made in the same manner and benefits both countries. Now, since both presidents have background in show business, obviously their way of communicating, their way of basically negotiating is somewhat theatrical. So I would personally just advise President Zelensky to focus on the practical side of things and ignore everything else.
Also joining us right now is NBC's Garrett Haake, who is at the White House. Garrett, what is the White House saying ahead of this meeting?
Well, Anna, this will be interesting because the president's tone has changed dramatically on President Zelensky over the past several years and over the past several days. The two had a very positive relationship during the first Trump administration, despite the impeachment that centered on Ukraine. And the president had been working with the Ukrainians, at least in theory, on this minerals deal until last week when he made this comment about Zelensky being a dictator. Then yesterday, during the visit of the British Prime Minister, the president took a much warmer tone towards Zelensky, suggesting that they can, in fact, work together on this critical minerals deal and seeming to back away from that comment. Take a little bit of a listen to what the president said yesterday that may be setting the table for today.
We're going to be signing really a very important agreement for both sides because it's really going to get us into that country. We'll be working there. We'll have a lot of people working there. And so in that sense, it's very good. It's a backstop, you could say. I don't think anybody's going to play around if we're there with a lot of workers.
I still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator.
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
And of course, he did say that. And I think part of this matters because somewhat uniquely to this president, and Donald Trump is just incredibly relationship focused when it comes to conducting foreign policy. He wants to get along with the person who's sitting in front of him. When he does so, he's more effective. That's why you see foreign leaders plan for these visits the way they do. That's why you see them heap compliments on President Trump the way they do. Volodymyr Zelensky knows that as well as anybody, and I expect we'll see a lot of that same dynamic in their various appearances here together at the White House today.
Ambassador McFaul, you just heard those comments from President Trump yesterday, asked about calling Zelensky a dictator, and I quote, "Did I say that? I can't believe I said that." What do you make of that apparent amnesia?
I think when you're with your allies and your base or you're on social media, you can say wacky, crazy things. That's when he called him a dictator. And when you're sitting next to the prime minister of our closest ally, you're more reluctant to say wacky, crazy things. And I take that as a good sign, not a bad sign. He is very relational in his diplomacy. It doesn't always lead to results, by the way. He had good relations with Putin for 4 years, never resulted in anything the first time around. Kim Jong-un comes to mind as well. But this is a good moment because Zelensky understands that. He is the one that said, I'll sign this deal, which I think the Ukrainians did a great job of negotiating, by the way. This is a good deal for both sides, as Igor said, because it doesn't have many details. I think people will be kind of surprised when they see it. There's not a lot of substance here. It's all aspirational. But Zelensky used that moment to say, I want to sign it with you personally, President Trump. He's the one that wanted to come to Washington so that he could get in the room with the president because he understands that that is the way you do business with Donald Trump.
What do you make, Igor, of this change in tone when it comes to Trump's characterization of President Zelensky?
It was expected. I mean, it's all a show. Like, look, as I said, you have to separate the emotional and the theatrics from the actual things that are happening. There are two important things happening that we're kind of not seeing because of all the theatrics. First of all, yes, it is a good deal because it's vague. And it all comes down to further deals that will be kind of, additional to this deal. So the details will be in the next deal. That's really important. And that's when the next next round of negotiations will actually happen. And I expect to see a lot more theatrics when that is happening. Secondly, from the Trump's tone of voice, I'm sensing that he's not getting what he was expecting to get from Russia. Hence, he pivots slightly to Ukraine, and we see that kind of little detente in his rhetoric. But I think it's a great thing that they're going to be in the room together. I think this deal is a great story for both countries.
So, Garrett, what type of minerals does Ukraine have that the U.S. is interested in? And do we know any specifics about this potential rare minerals deal?
Well, metals and rare earths are the key things here. Things like titanium, of which Ukraine has a large supply, uranium, which is in high demand. So too lithium. You hear a lot about lithium-ion batteries in electric cars and in advanced manufacturing. Ukraine has large deposits of all of those. The specifics of the deal, as Igor rightly points out, are in many cases yet to be worked out. This is essentially about creating a fund that both countries would have ownership or administration of, that would then invest in projects to mine these minerals. If that sounds like something that would take a long time, it would. And that's also part of the way in which I think Donald Trump views this as a kind of security guarantee for Ukraine. He's talked about this extensively yesterday in particular, the idea that you would have Americans, either contractors or businesses, operating in Ukraine and in eastern Ukraine specifically, working on all of this, and that Russia wouldn't want to attack knowing there are Americans there. It's a theory that doesn't necessarily want to be tested, but it's part of how he thinks about this.
Ambassador McFaul, take a listen to what the UK Prime Minister had to say about President Trump's negotiating tactic pushing for this mineral deal. I think we have the sound. Do we have it, guys?
You blame the U.S. for taking an approach that it deserves to be paid back for the money invested in the war.
Well, I can see the value in the approach in relation to minerals, but I can see very clearly the argument that President Trump makes in relation to minerals. And I can also see the validity of his point when he says that if there is a deal on minerals, then the US has economic interests in Ukraine, which, if you like, form at least one element of any security guarantee, because that in its own right is an important aspect.
Ambassador McFaul, do you agree that if the U.S. has skin in the game on these minerals, then that's some kind of security guarantee? Presumably they're not going to let Russia storm in.
I don't agree. I'm sorry. This is a good deal because it establishes a relationship between Zelensky and Trump. It keeps President Trump in the game. But for me personally, there's one part of that that's just morally wrong and then strategically wrong. So morally, I do not like the idea that my country is asking Ukraine to reimburse us for assistance that the Congress approved in a democratic process. The president signed it. There was no clause in that law that said you have to reimburse us. And when he's sitting next to the Prime Minister of Great Britain, we didn't ask the Brits to reimburse us for what they did with us in Afghanistan and Iraq. By the way, we didn't reimburse the Ukrainians who served with us in Afghanistan. So this whole concept I am philosophically against. But the second thing about the security guarantees, just two things for a minute. If there's trillions of dollars of these minerals in Ukraine, why haven't they been mined before? This idea that they've been sitting on all this wealth and they've never done it. I'm a little skeptical that it's going to be so easy to create all this wealth. But second, and the most important part, Ukraine needs real security guarantees, not business people, not businesses, not miners and their security guards. That is insufficient. Moreover, those companies are not going to invest billions of dollars for years and years and years. We're talking about mining, right? We're not talking about sandwiches shops where you can come in and out. They're not going to invest that unless there is security. So there's a real chicken and egg problem here. And I support the agreement. I think it's a step in the right direction. But the idea that it's going to serve in lieu of peacekeepers or a membership to NATO, I think I'm very skeptical of that.